My in-laws refused to invite me to Thanksgiving because my kids are disabled, so I started fighting back. And once they realized everything I was doing for them, they began losing it and trying everything to make me change my mind. I never thought I'd see the day when my husband's parents would look me straight in the face and tell me my kids were banned from their house. Let me explain. Thanksgiving was approaching in a few weeks, and my MIL Janet's voice had this sly, cheerful tone as she broke the news. Sweetheart, we need to discuss Thanksgiving arrangements this year. I felt momentarily hopeful. I still craved those family gatherings, mainly because my twins, Zoe and Tyler, absolutely worshipped their grandparents despite the growing distance. Sure thing, Janet. What's the plan? There was this awkward silence just long enough to make my stomach drop. Melissa, I'm gonna be honest. We've heard the rumors. None of us want your children around ours. I swear I felt my face turn red with anger. You see, my twins were 9 and Zoe had previously gotten into an accident on a school trip. They were all on a boat, and their lives were put in the hands of the sailor. After the boat crashed and my baby got permanent brain damage, it was discovered that the sailor was drunk. But instead of my baby displaying permanent signs of physical damage, she became more energetic. Like, a lot more. Like only sleeps 2 hours a day and starts food fights when she's bored. Type of energetic. But after careful thought, I decided not to tell anyone. Her teachers were aware of the situation and managed to keep it from the students. I thought it was the best way to deal with things simply because, well, you know how kids can be. But it backfired. Within a few weeks, dozens of rumors about my beautiful baby girl circulated around the school, and the main one was that somehow she had managed to sell herself to some strangers for the weekend so I could afford a new car, which I happened to purchase the week after. And I guess the rumor made its way to my in-laws, because now all of a sudden, lovely little Janet was uninviting me from the family gathering. We're trying something different this year, you know, something more refined. I tried to keep my calm as I said, "Oh, okay, so just no kids this year?" But then she opened her ugly mouth super wide to sigh before saying, "Listen up, I'm gonna be honest. We don't want your kids there, but Carrie's are invited, so find a babysitter, or don't come. Up to you." I took a deep breath as I thought about all the golden child stories my husband, Brian, had told me about his sister, Krusty Carrie. I guess I didn't hide my sadness that well, because that's when Janky Janet said, "Relax, you crazy beach. It's not a personal attack." Except she said it with a smile, so it could pass as a passive-aggressive joke rather than spiteful mockery. I bit my tongue so hard it bled. This wasn't just about Thanksgiving. It was how they always put Carrie's daughters on pedestals while treating my kids as an afterthought. "No, Janet, if my children aren't welcome, then I'm not coming either." A heavy silence stretched between us. Then Janet exhaled sharply, like I was being completely unreasonable. "Fine, have it your way." She immediately left my home, slamming the door as hard as she could on the way out. I could hear my twins in the playroom, squealing with delight as they built some kind of blanket tent, completely unaware that their grandparents had just dismissed them like they were inconvenient pets. Taking a deep breath, my thoughts raced. I'd spent my entire marriage trying to earn my in-laws' approval, but at what cost? I was done with this game. Janet and Richard had made their choice. Now it was time for me to make mine, because they'd regret it sooner than they expected. The weight of Janet's words lingered long after she left. I always knew my in-laws preferred Carrie, but I'd convinced myself it wasn't as obvious as it seemed, that deep down they valued all their family equally. But that night, they'd ripped away any pretense. They didn't even try to hide it anymore. They loved her children more than mine. Suddenly, a burst of giggles echoed from the other room. I turned to see Zoe and Tyler sprawled under their blanket fort, completely oblivious to what had just happened. My heart ached. They deserved so much better. I squared my shoulders and walked into the playroom with a forced smile. But as we snuggled on the couch later, the anger inside me refused to quiet down. I'd spent years trying to fit into the Palmer family, following their unspoken rules, hoping that if I just tried hard enough, they'd finally see me as Krusty Carrie's equal. But I was done trying. I spent all night planning my next move. I felt like an evil mastermind. And in the morning, my time came. It was perfect. I woke up to a text from Carrie. "Janet says you're being difficult about Thanksgiving. Why do you always have to create so much drama?" I stared at the screen, my jaw clenching. Of course Janet had already complained to her. Me. "So she told you she uninvited my kids but welcomed yours." The typing bubbles appeared, disappeared, then reappeared. Finally, "She just wants a peaceful dinner, Melissa. You know your twins can be a handful. A handful. Like they were something to be endured, not loved." Something in me snapped. Me. "Enjoy your perfect Thanksgiving, Carrie. Count us out completely." I silenced my phone before she could respond. They didn't want my children at their precious table? Fine. I wouldn't be part of their world at all. And they were about to discover what that really meant. For years, I'd been their reliable go-to. When Richard needed someone to troubleshoot his computer issues, he called me. When Janet needed help coordinating family events, I was the one making calls and running errands. When they needed someone to pick up their prescriptions, I was their first call. And Carrie? She got to be the cherished daughter who did the bare minimum while receiving maximum praise. But if my family wasn't good enough for them, they weren't going to benefit from my help anymore. A week before Thanksgiving, Janet called again. I almost ignored it, but decided to answer. "Hello? Melissa?" she said, her tone cautious. "I'm just checking in. I know you were upset, but I really hope you'll reconsider. We'd love to have you and Brian there. Not you and the kids, just you and Brian." I took a deep breath. "I meant what I said, Janet. If my children aren't welcome, I'm not coming either." She sighed like I was exhausting her. "I just don't understand why you're being so stubborn. It's just one evening. You know how special Carrie's girls are to us." And there it was, the final painful confirmation that my children would never measure up in her eyes. "You've made your position perfectly clear," I said flatly. "Don't worry about us anymore. Melissa, don't be ridiculous." I ended the call before she could finish, and this time, I didn't feel like crying. I started small. When Richard texted asking if I could help set up his new printer that weekend, I left him on red. When Janet called asking if I could grab a few things for her at Costco, I let it go to voicemail. For years, I'd been their personal assistant, always available, always reliable, but not anymore. It didn't take long for them to notice. By Thanksgiving, I'd ignored 14 calls and 7 texts. That morning, Carrie messaged me again. Mom and Dad are really upset you're ghosting them. Are you seriously going to let this get so out of hand? Me. It got out of hand when they told me my kids weren't good enough to sit at their table. She didn't respond after that. I silenced my phone and focused on my real family. Zoe and Tyler were helping Brian mix waffle batter at the counter. They were covered in flour and laughing hysterically. This was our Thanksgiving, and for the first time in years, I felt completely at peace. But my in-laws weren't done yet, and their next move would be something I'd never forgive. Thanksgiving morning was peaceful in a way I hadn't experienced in years. No rushing to dress the twins in outfits they'd hate. No stress over preparing a side dish that would meet Janet's standards. No anxious glances at the clock to make sure we'd arrive exactly on time. Instead, we existed in our own little bubble, our home filled with laughter and the sweet smell of maple syrup and fresh coffee. Zoe and Tyler took turns helping Brian flip waffles, giggling every time he pretended to almost drop one. For once, I felt genuinely relaxed. Then my phone started buzzing. I glanced at the screen. Janet. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again and again. Brian shot me a concerned look. Want me to turn it off? I hesitated, then shook my head. No, if it's an actual emergency, I should know. I answered with a flat, hello? Oh, so now you pick up, Janet huffed. I suppose you're just sitting at home sulking while we're all enjoying a lovely dinner. I sighed. If you're calling to make me feel bad, I really don't have time. That's not why I called. Her voice turned sharp. Did you cancel the Amazon account? I froze. What are you talking about? Brian's Amazon Prime account, the one we've been using for household items and gifts. It's saying our payment method is no longer valid. A cold realization washed over me. The Amazon account she was talking about wasn't Brian's. It was mine. 3 years ago, when Janet complained about shipping costs, I'd added her as a household member on my Prime account. I'd meant it as a temporary kindness, but they'd never mentioned removing themselves, and I'd forgotten about it. You mean my Amazon account? I said slowly. A pause. Then Janet scoffed. Oh, don't be so petty, Melissa. It's just an account. You make good money at that tech job, and we thought— You thought what? My voice shook slightly. That you'd keep using my Prime membership while telling me my kids aren't good enough for your Thanksgiving? Don't act like this is some huge betrayal. We're family. The least you could do is share your benefits. I inhaled sharply. Are you serious? After explicitly excluding my children, you still expected to use my account? Do you even hear yourself? Janet let out an exaggerated sigh. This is exactly why we avoid difficult conversations with you. You always overreact. Overreact. I was done. You're right about one thing, I said, my voice eerily calm. I did cancel your access, and since we're being honest now, let me be crystal clear. You won't be using any of my accounts or services again. Ever. Janet gasped like I'd slapped her. Melissa, don't be absurd. And while we're at it, don't expect any more tech support, prescription pickups, or anything else either. You made your choice when you excluded my children, and now I'm making mine. Silence. Then, in a voice colder than I'd ever heard from her, she said, You'll regret this, and hung up. I stood there for a moment, gripping my phone so tightly my hand hurt. Then I turned back toward my family. Brian was watching me carefully. Everything okay? I managed a small smile. Yeah, just setting some long overdue boundaries. He didn't press for details. We spent the rest of the day creating our own Thanksgiving traditions, making homemade pizzas, playing board games, building a pillow fort in the living room. For the first time in ages, there was no underlying tension, no walking on eggshells, no pressure to be someone I wasn't. But something told me this wasn't over. My in-laws weren't going to let their convenient helper just walk away, and their next move would reveal exactly what kind of people they truly were. The silence from my in-laws lasted exactly 3 days. On Sunday, my phone lit up with Carrie's name. After a moment's hesitation, I answered. Hello? What the actual hell, Melissa? She snapped without preamble. Mom just called me crying because you cut them off from everything. What is wrong with you? I closed my eyes, pinching the bridge of my nose. Did she also mention they've been using my Prime account for years without my knowledge? A pause. Well, she said you were helping them out. I let out a humorless laugh. Carrie, they've ordered thousands of dollars of stuff on my account without asking, while treating my kids like they're second-class citizens. But sure, I'm the villain here. She sighed dramatically. Look, I get you're upset, but cutting them off completely? That's extreme. You mean like completely excluding my children from Thanksgiving while inviting yours? They just wanted a peaceful meal, Melissa. Mom says your kids can be pretty wild. My grip on the phone tightened. So they can use my Amazon account, but my children aren't good enough for their precious dinner? Got it. You're twisting everything, she groaned. No, Carrie. I'm finally seeing everything clearly. There was a long pause. Then her voice turned calculating. Maybe we can compromise. What if you just kept the Prime membership shared but set some limits? That way no one has to suffer over a simple misunderstanding. I nearly choked. Let me get this straight. You want me to keep sharing my benefits after they literally told me they prefer your kids to mine? They didn't mean it like that, she muttered. They said it, Carrie. In those exact words. She had no response. After a moment, her voice turned cold. Fine. If you want to be this petty, that's on you. But don't expect Mom and Dad to forgive you anytime soon. I smirked. I'll manage. For the next few weeks, my in-laws tried the silent treatment. No calls, no texts. I figured they were hoping I'd eventually cave and come crawling back, begging for their approval like I always had. What they didn't realize was that for the first time in years, I didn't need it anymore. And just when I thought they'd finally given up, they pulled one last desperate move. It was mid-December when an official-looking envelope arrived. Brian found it in the mail, frowning as he read the return address. It's from my parents. I tensed. Great. Let me guess. Guilt, manipulation, or straight-up gaslighting? He gave me a wry smile. Let's find out. I tore open the envelope, my stomach dropping as I read the contents. Inside was a formal letter with an itemized statement. I laughed in disbelief. You have got to be kidding me. Brian took the letter, scanning it quickly. They're billing you for all the favors they've done for us over the years? Computer help, babysitting hours, meals they've cooked? His face darkened. Are they seriously trying to charge us for being family? Apparently they were. They had meticulously itemized every single thing they'd ever done for us. Rides to the airport, the times they'd watched the twins, holiday meals they'd hosted. And at the bottom of the the page, a grand total, $6,475. I stared at the figure. They honestly think I'm going to write them a check for $6,000? Brian shook his head, visibly angry now. This is ridiculous. They must be desperate. I exhaled slowly, fury building inside me. This wasn't about money. This was about control. One final pathetic attempt to pull me back into their orbit. I looked at Brian, mind made up. I think it's time I paid your parents a visit. The next afternoon, I drove to their house alone, clutching their absurd invoice. When Janet opened the door, her expression immediately hardened. Oh, so now you decide to visit. I held up the letter. You seriously thought this would work? She crossed her arms. It's what's fair. I laughed sharply. Fair? You want to charge me for basic family interactions while expecting me to let you use my accounts for free? Richard appeared behind her, looking smug. We've done a lot for your family, Melissa, and now you're just cutting us off. I shook my head in disbelief. No, you cut us off when you made it clear my children weren't good enough, when you took advantage of my generosity, when you put a price tag on family relationships. Janet's lips formed a thin line. If you don't want to pay, maybe we should take this to small claims court. I met her gaze steadily. Go ahead. She blinked. What? Take me to court, I challenged. Try explaining to a judge why you're billing your daughter-in-law for Christmas dinners while using her Amazon account without permission. See how that goes. They suddenly looked uncertain. Richard cleared his throat. We just thought you'd want to make things right. I laughed again. Oh, I am making things right. I tore the invoice in half, watching their eyes widen. I'm done being your personal assistant and ATM. Janet gasped. You ungrateful little... I turned and walked back to my car. Merry Christmas, I called over my shoulder, and for the first time in my married life, I felt completely free. As I drove away, I realized something important. They weren't upset about the favors or the money. They were upset because for the first time ever, I had taken back my power, and I wasn't giving it up again. I thought that after ripping up their ridiculous invoice, my in-laws would finally back off, that maybe they'd sit in the ruins of their own arrogance and realize they'd pushed too far. But people like Janet and Richard don't change. They just escalate. It started with a text 3 days before Christmas. Janet, Melissa, this is getting silly. We're family. You don't turn your back on family over a minor disagreement. I ignored it. The next day, another message arrived. Janet, we've decided to forgive you. Come to Christmas dinner and we can put this all behind us. I nearly laughed out loud. They forgive me? Then came one from Carrie. Carrie, they're really hurting, Melissa. Just apologize so we can move forward. I finally responded. Interesting. They weren't hurting when they excluded my children or when they used my accounts without permission. I think they'll survive. I blocked her number after that. Christmas Eve arrived. Brian and I had just finished decorating our tree, and the twins were dancing around in their matching pajamas, too excited to settle down. Everything felt perfect. Then the doorbell rang. Brian and I exchanged looks. I already knew who it was. I walked to the door, took a deep breath, and opened it. There they stood. Janet, Richard, Carrie, and her husband Mark, like some sort of family intervention squad. I crossed my arms. What do you want? Janet smiled with that fake sweetness I'd come to recognize. We just want to talk. Not interested, I said flatly. Richard sighed heavily. Melissa, enough. You've made your point. Let's resolve this before it goes too far. I narrowed my eyes. Too far? What does that mean? Janet exchanged a look with Carrie. We just don't want this to affect the children. Something about her tone made my skin crawl. What are you talking about? Carrie stepped forward, arms crossed. Mom and Dad have been talking to a family attorney. A cold wave of dread washed over me. A what? Janet nodded, her eyes full of manufactured concern. We're worried, Melissa. You've cut your children off from their family over a simple misunderstanding. That's not healthy for them. My pulse quickened. What exactly are you suggesting? Richard cleared his throat. We've been looking into grandparents' visitation rights. For a moment, all I could hear was my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then I laughed. Not a small chuckle, but a loud, incredulous laugh that took even me by surprise. They actually thought they could legally force their way back into our lives? After everything? Mark frowned. What's so funny? I wiped my eyes. You're serious? You think any judge would look at this situation and side with you? Janet's expression hardened. We've done nothing wrong. Nothing wrong? I repeated, stepping closer. You explicitly excluded my children from family gatherings. You used my accounts without permission. And now because I finally stood up to you, you think you can threaten legal action? Richard's face darkened. You don't want to go down this road, Melissa. I met his glare with a cold smile. Actually, I do. I pulled out my phone. Think very carefully about what you're threatening, I said quietly. Because I have every text, every voicemail, every receipt from my Amazon account. I have proof of everything, and I promise you if you try this, you'll regret it. Carrie gasped. Melissa, come on. No. I snapped, eyes fixed on my in-laws. You have absolutely no case. You know it. I know it. And if you keep pushing, I'll make sure everyone you know sees exactly who you really are. A tense silence fell. Then Janet's face contorted with anger. You're being completely unreasonable. I smiled. No, Janet. I'm finally standing my ground. I stepped back inside my house and gripped the door. Merry Christmas, I said calmly, then slammed it in their faces. They never followed through with their pathetic legal threat. They knew they had nothing. They knew they'd lost. In the weeks and months that followed, I didn't hear from them at all. Not a text, not a call, nothing. And for the first time since marrying Brian, it felt like freedom. The weight of their judgment, gone. The pressure to meet their impossible standards, gone. The endless cycle of manipulation, gone. 6 months later, on a warm summer afternoon, I sat on our back porch watching Zoe and Tyler splash in their kiddie pool. Brian handed me an iced tea and sat beside me. It's been quiet, he observed. I nodded. Yeah, it's nice. He smiled slightly. Think they'll ever try again? I sipped my drink, watching my children laugh as they splashed each other. Doesn't matter, I said, because I had already won. I had my children, my real family, and I'd never let anyone make them feel unwanted again.